Hello, I'm Janine with Natural Grocers. I am pleased to present Mary Collette Rogers. Mary is the founder of The New Kitchen, a nonprofit dedicated to introducing a new view of the kitchen. In The New View, we begin seeing the kitchen as a pathway to good health. For over 30 years, she has been teaching busy people the skills and tools to make healthy cooking easy and doable for everyday home cooks. This is the point of today's class. It's guilt-free comfort eating. Welcome, Mary, and what do we got going today?
Well, today we're going to be exploring the concept of recipe reform. And back in the low-fat 90s, recipe reform was a big idea. We were all looking for ways to cut the fat from our diets. So there were lots of articles and cookbooks and recipes that gave us tips and strategies to be able to cut the fat out of our dishes. Now that those days are past and we're not busily counting all the fat grams in our dishes, that idea of recipe reform has kind of faded into the background. But what I found is that it's still a really useful strategy and a valuable one to make our dishes healthier in lots of ways, not just in terms of cutting fat, although it's still good for that if you're interested in that. So today what I want to share are 5 recipe reform techniques, or tricks I call them, that you can use with any of your recipe favorites, your food favorites that you still want to be able to eat and not feel guilty about. Today we're going to be using those 5 tricks to take standard beef tacos and transform them into super healthy spinach and sweet potato soft shell tacos. So if you're ready, Janine, I'll head over to the kitchen and we'll get started.
Okay, so welcome everyone to my kitchen, and we're going to get going right away and get going on the taco filling. And when we have a break in that, I'll tell you a little bit more about that recipe reform idea. And to start the recipe, no big surprise, we're going to be starting by chopping and sauteing an onion. Because like you know, that's just about the way almost every recipe starts. And that's why it's really good to have a good organized way to chop your onions so that it doesn't become a barrier to you making a lot of healthy dishes. So what I'm going to do is show you my technique, and it may work for you. You may already have a technique, but just make sure you've got something that's efficient and not a hassle and a stressful way to start the way you're cooking. So what we're going to do is, as you saw, what I did is I cut the ends off of my onion, set it down on the flat end, and then I sliced it through vertically. Then it's really easy to peel off that outer layer of the onion. You don't have to labor over that for very long at all. It just kind of pops off there once you've got it cut in half. And then I go ahead, my recipe calls for the onion to be cut into 1/2 inch dice. Dice simply means little squares. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice the onion one direction in 1/2 inch slices. And then I'm going to go ahead and slice it in the other direction into 1/2 inch dice. All right, and then I'll do the other half. And what I'll do is I'm going to pull my island up a little bit closer here so you can see this maybe a little bit better. Here we go. I'm going to slice it one direction into 1/2 inch slices, and you'll see that I'm using my middle finger and thumb to hold those slices together so that then when I turn it, it's really easy to go ahead and finish cutting those, slicing the other direction, and I get that nice 1/2 inch dice. Now the next thing we're going to be doing is sauteing the onion. And sauteing, the point of sauteing is to build a flavor foundation, because what sauteing does is it browns the onions. And onions, once they're brown, become just wonderful and flavorful. So I'm going to go ahead and put my oil in the pan. I've already heated the pan up. I've been heating it up while I was chopping onions, so it's almost hot. What we want to do is get that olive oil hot but not smoking is the term that they use. And so we want to be able to have it hot enough so that when we put take a few tester pieces and put them in there, and if you get a good sizzle, then you know that you're ready to put the onions in. And because I preheated my pan, that's why it went so fast. Now today I'm using my big saute pan, because you'll notice, I hope you have a chance to get the recipe and print it out. You'll notice though that it makes 6 servings. which might seem like, oh, that's way too much. And it's fine if you want to cut it in half. But can I suggest that you go ahead and make the full batch, have leftovers, and then if you still have something left over, put it in the freezer. Because the way I view it is, if I'm going to get all of this stuff out and cook, I'm going to get at least 2 to 3 meals out of it. So, but of course, feel free to cut it in half if it's 6 servings, is just way too much. But that's why I'm using my big skillet. I also love this skillet because it's so heavy bottom, it's really hard to burn things in that. So we're going to let those go ahead and brown just a few minutes. And while we have that lull in the action, we'll go ahead and look on down in our recipe and see what's next. And the next thing that needs to be sauteed with the onions is the garlic. And so I've already pre-chopped some of the garlic because we've got a lot to do in a short amount of time. But I do want to show you, and I'll push my island up here closer again, so that you can see how I'm going to move all these little things here. You can see what I do with the garlic is I cut off one end and then the other end. And usually what that'll do is that it makes it really easy that the skin almost just pops off. So you don't have to sit there and peel it off before you cut the ends off. That can be quite laborious. Then what I do is I go ahead and I slice it one way. That gets the chopping process started. Then I can go the other, I can get it chopped all the way by I hold the point of my knife down and just kind of rotate around it like this. And the recipe calls for minced garlic, which is a little bit smaller than chopped. But honestly, it's going to get cooked. So chopped, roughly, we're talking, like 1/4 inch pieces, between an 1/8 and 1/4 inch. And we were talking a little bit about this sauteing process. And like I said, the point of this is to brown things like our onions, our garlic, our jalapenos, because that forms a really good flavor foundation for the dish. And what that gets into is the point of cooking, which is really to build layers of flavor. So each little thing that we do is a way to build up those layers of flavors. And sometimes you don't have a chance to do all of them. That's okay. But the more that you can do, the better the flavor is that you get. Now I'm looking at my onions. It's been about 3 to 4 minutes. And so I'm seeing that they're ready to flip, because now they've got some nice browning going on the bottom. And what you'll notice that I was not stirring these while they were cooking. I'm only turning them now because they started browning. If you keep stirring and stirring as they cook, what you often end up with is kind of a mushy mess and not some nice, flavorful browned onions. So now I'm going to go ahead at this point and we're going to do our hole in the middle trick. And what that means is that we're going to push all the onions to the side of the pan. And then into that middle part, I'm going to put a teaspoon or 2 of olive oil. Let that warm up just a little bit. And then into that oil, I'm going to be putting the garlic. I'm going to put the jalapeno and our spices. And the reason that we do that is because the oil, if I put these directly into that bit of oil, it has a chance to absorb the flavors and then it transmits it through the whole dish. The oil also brings out some of the flavor in the garlic. So if you've watched some of my earlier classes, you know about this little trick. And you're probably using it, I hope, in your own cooking. But if you're new, we call this the hole in the middle trick. The next thing I'm adding is the jalapeno peppers. And with both the garlic and the jalapeno and all the spices, I give you a range of measurements. If you are just new to some of these ingredients and you don't know if you're going to like them, always stick with the smaller one, because you can always add more at the end. Now, the jalapenos, I pre-chopped those because a funny thing happens with jalapenos, and that is, in almost any hot peppers, is that when you slice them and start chopping them, they release this thing called, see if I can pronounce it, capsius, and I can't pronounce it ever. I always have to look at the pronunciation. But it's this hot, almost aerosol that if you happen to be talking, breathing heavily or anything, you go in and you could have a real coffee fit. And I didn't want to do that on the camera today, so I pre-chopped them. But I'll tell you how I go ahead and do this is I slice the pepper in half, cut off the end, and then I take my melon baller. Let me see if I have it. Yeah, this is my melon baller. And I just scoop the seeds out. into the compost bin, and then I slice them lengthwise and chop them horizontally, and that's how I get that quick dice. And I just do that without like breathing much because it will start a coughing fit for you. But the good news is, as some of the experts say, that if you have to do a lot of these and it really does bother you, I guess you can put a wet bandana over your mouth, and that can help reduce that tendency to have those aerosols invade your lungs. So now we're going to go ahead and add our spices. And what we've got is 2 teaspoons of ground cumin. And boy, the smell of that ground cumin, especially once it hits the heat, is just wonderful. A couple teaspoons of dried leaf oregano. And make sure you're using the dried leaf, not the ground, because the ground would put a whole lot of oregano in, a lot more than you might want. This is the dried leaves. You can see the little leaves in there. And you can see what I'm doing is sifting it into the pan. That releases some of the volatile oils. So again, brings out more flavor. You can see how we just keep building that flavor. I've got all of that going into the oil there. And then the last thing I'm going to add is the chili powder. And again, it says 1 to 2 teaspoons, but I know, because I've used this a lot, that I love 2 teaspoons because I like just a little bit of heat. But if you're a little sensitive or you don't know, again, stick with that 1 teaspoon. You can always add more of this at the end. So we've got all of that in there, and it's had a chance to get in there, get in with that oil. Now we go ahead and we turn and stir everything back together again and get all of those flavors all mixed up. And now what we've got is the flavor foundation for our dish. So then we get those all together. And then the recipe instructs you to let those cook just a little bit more. And we'll do that. And that gives us a little bit of a breather. I think I'll turn the heat down just a little so we don't burn it. Gives us a little breather to talk a little bit more about this idea of recipe reform and what is it and what is it good for. And basically the way to look at it is it's a way to have your cake and eat it too. So you've got some favorite foods and they're your comfort foods, but they might not be so great for us, and yet we'd still love to eat them. And recipe reform is the idea of using some little tweaks that can take those food favorites, those comfort foods, make them healthy for us so that we can eat them without any guilt. So today, as I mentioned, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reforming the standard beef taco. It's a common food favorite. We're going to turn it into a much healthier version. And it's interesting, for this class, I went ahead and just Googled, Googled taco recipes. And interestingly, every one of the recipes and every one of the pictures just showed a hard shell taco with beef in it and a little sprinkling of lettuce and tomato. And so, you got to ask yourself, is that so bad? And no, I always tell people about, healthy eating is a continuum. And if you look at a standard beef taco, at least it's mostly real whole foods, and that's a good thing. And there's some debate there, I know, but it's mostly just real whole foods. And so that is a good start. It's a whole lot better than at the other end of the continuum eating a bag of Bugles or a 7-Eleven hot dog. So you definitely, that's a good progress, a good starting point, but we can make it so much better. And that's what we're going to do today, is go through these 5 recipe reform tricks to find out, well, how can we do that? And the first one of those is to think about getting the not foods out of your diet. Now, what do I mean by not foods? Well, I know that taco kits and taco seasoning mixes are really popular. They promise that we can have tacos on the table really quickly. But the problem is if you would read the ingredients, and I'm always encouraging people, read the ingredients of things before you put them in your body. And if you look at that, you'll find out that, for instance, this is from one real popular taco seasoning mix. It contains maltodextrin, silicon dioxide, citric acid, sugar, natural flavors. These are all what I call not foods. They're not the kind of things that are supposed to go in your body. And so you might panic and go, well, what am I going to do to be able to make fast tacos? Well, we've got an easy solution for you. And that is, you can see what I used was from Natural Grocers. They've got a chili powder. It's a spice blend. And all that it has in it is chili peppers, sea salt, cumin, oregano, and garlic. So you can see those are all real whole foods, and it didn't take any longer to add this to my dish than to open a package of seasoning mix and put it in there. So you can see that it's really possible. That's an easy way. It's totally possible to use this to get a healthier dish. So, and I might add that it's a lot cheaper because you can imagine how many batches of tacos you can make with this one bag that maybe costs $3 or $4. So now we're ready to return to our skillet. This is cooked enough we can start adding the other ingredients. And the first of those is the beans. And we're adding them with the juices. Now, recipe reform trick number 2, which is picking a protein that's right for you. And what I mean by that is, there's a couple of different camps when it comes to proteins. On the one hand, there's the plant-based protein people, and they want to stick with things like beans and nuts and things like that, tofu. And so the recipe as written is going to be just great for them. But then there's also the animal protein people that they do better, or they just prefer the taste of animal protein. And so it's really easy to just go ahead and add the standard hamburger to this dish. What I would do is I would do it, how we browned the onions just a little bit right before we were going to add the jalapeno and garlic. Go ahead and push those onions aside like we did. Crumble the ground beef in there. Let it brown a little bit. Mix it in with the onions and then push that aside, and then do your whole hole in the middle thing. So really easy to make this a meat dish if that's what you want. You could also use chicken or pork for sure. And a third camp are people kind of in the middle that are maybe transitioning, trying to get over more to a plant-based diet. Well, so what you could do is you could use a half a pound of ground beef and a half a can of beans if you want, and just see how that goes. And now you'll notice that when I added these in, you're probably going, what is she doing? Because the recipe calls for black beans, because this looks so pretty with all the colors in this dish. But I had this can of white beans that I needed to use up. So I went ahead and put that in, and you could absolutely do that. You could use red beans or pinto beans as well. So don't think you're limited to the black beans. You can use whatever you've got in your cupboard, especially if it's something that you need to use up, or maybe some leftovers in your fridge. So, okay, so we have got our beans in there, and that's our recipe reform trick number 2, is to modify the recipe as needed to get the protein that you need. Now we're going to get to recipe reform trick number 3, which is my favorite, adding lots of vegetables. And the 2 vegetables that we're going to be using today are sweet potatoes and spinach. Now, the thing about vegetables is that I think it's pretty universal that almost everybody can get more vegetables into their diet. I doubt that there's many people that are getting the recommended number. So there's a couple ways you can get more vegetables into your diet. One is you can build a bigger and bigger pile of vegetables on the side of your plate, which is fine, but it can be a little overwhelming to look at that and eat it, and it might be a little bit boring. The other way you can do it is you can just weave more vegetables into your entrees. And that makes them really delicious. You hardly notice them. And especially if you've got picky eaters at the table, or you've got a little bit of vegetable resistance yourself. Well, once they're woven in and you don't really taste them, you might not even see them that much, you'll find that it's really easy to get your vegetable quota in each day. So with the sweet potatoes, I've already cut up most of them over here, but I'm just showing you that I'm cutting these, and you'll notice you're going, what is she? Those things aren't peeled. No, they're not, because the peels have a lot of nutrition, and it saves a lot of time if I don't have to peel them. And we're always looking for ways to save time. So I'm just going ahead and cutting those into, about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch pieces. I found a serrated knife works a lot. This is just a serrated steak knife. It works really well for that. So I'm going to go ahead and add these to this. And the technique, of course, you probably don't have time to bake a sweet potato at night when you're trying to make this dish. So the strategy is plan ahead, make a dinner where you're going to have sweet potatoes anyway, and just cook a couple extras. Now, should you forget that, the other thing I did a couple weeks ago, I was testing the recipe. I actually grated the raw sweet potato on my box grater, and that worked really well too. You might just have to cook it a little bit longer when you simmer this at the end. So I'm putting that in there, and all of a sudden I'm starting to see that beautiful color. Now we're gonna go ahead and put in our spinach. Now this is called bunch spinach, and they call it a bunch because it comes in a bunch. It's different than the stuff that you get in the, that's pre-washed in the plastic containers. I use this for a couple of reasons. The first of those being that I don't have to, add one more plastic box to the environment. But also, I find that the flavor of bunch spinach is it's much more intense and spinachy than the box stuff, and that's because it's more mature. And then the third reason is that it's just going to cook for a little bit, and the bunch spinach holds up a little because it's a little bit more mature. But now, does that mean you can't use the pre-washed stuff? Of course not. If that makes this dish doable for you, then you absolutely want to do that. Because that's the most important thing, is that you get the dish done and that you're eating it and not worrying about whether you're using boxed or bunched. But just in case you're interested, I'm going to turn my heat up now so we can get that simmering. But just in case you're interested, the way I do this, the recipe calls for the spinach to be destemmed. That does not mean you need to go through and destem each leaf. I just take and hack off the bottom part there. And then, but don't throw those away, because those can be cut up, washed, and put in things like an egg omelet, a soup, something like that. And then this part, I go ahead and just chop and wash in my salad spinner. And so it doesn't really take much time if you want to try this bunch spinach as opposed to the pre-washed spinach in the boxes. So, okay, so now I think we have got, let's just make sure that we've got everything in there. And it looks like we do. And, I'm just noticing that it's a little bit dry, which, we don't want it real liquidy for sure. For tacos, you don't want it would make your tacos soggy. But mine is just looking a little bit dry. So what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of broth. And the instructions include that. I'm going to add this little bit of broth, just maybe a quarter cup, just to get that going. And this is the point then when we go ahead and we let this simmer for, the recipe says 10 to 15 minutes. Don't shortchange yourself on that, because this is so important. This is when all the flavors come together and you get what I call a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. And if you short circuit that, then you just may not taste quite as good. So we're going to let this cook down a little bit. And like, if you're going to use that box spinach, I might not put it in at this point because it cooks so rapidly. I put it in near the end of the simmer time so it doesn't kind of turn to mush. And just want to emphasize that in the recipe, I list a whole bunch of different vegetables that you could try to add to your tacos. Maybe substituting them for these, maybe adding them to what we've got here. Things like zucchini, the different kinds of peppers, cabbage. One of them is kind of interesting. It's roasted beets, which add a kind of sweet flavor, kind of like these sweet potatoes do. And so it sounds really unusual, I know, but we've made it several times and we really like it. And that's the thing about, I know that this whole technique might sound a little unusual to you, but can I encourage you to try it? Because, our taste buds are a lot more adaptable than you think. And you can start having a little bit of fun with this as you go, oh, wow, let me try this or let me try that. If you're new, don't worry, maybe keep the amount smaller. And maybe, of course, keep the pieces chopped smaller. But do give yourself time to adapt to things. You might be surprised at how your taste buds begin to enjoy this a lot, because your body is getting what it needs, the nutrients, the vital nutrients it needs from all these vegetables. And so your body will begin to say, crave these, and also say, thank you. You're giving me what I need. So this has started to boil. I'm going to go ahead and stir it just a little bit. And I'm glad I put in that little extra broth. And now once that it's boiling, I'm seeing bubbles all around. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. I'm probably about medium low on that. So while we have that little break here while that's cooking, wanted to mention a couple other little points about this dish that we're making. If you joined me in November, I did another class for natural grocers. It was called How to Cook Healthy Meals Without Really Cooking. And what we did is we made a Caribbean greens skillet, and we learned about the cooking without cooking strategy, which is learning to use convenience foods that are healthy to cut down the time that it takes to make a healthy meal. And guess what? That works for this recipe just like it did for the Caribbean greens one. Because as we look over here, let me see if I can grab my little things from here. you can see all of these convenience products, and we're okay with them because they're all just real whole foods. For the foundation, you can use the aromatic foundation, you can use chopped onions, you can use canned jalapeno peppers, you can use bottled chopped garlic. So imagine how fast that foundation would come together if you didn't have to chop all those things. That could all be done together. Then when you get to the sweet potatoes, there's such a thing as frozen, chopped, or cubed sweet potatoes. You can use that, of course, with the box spinach, or even frozen spinach could work in this. And then when you get down to what we're going to get into right now, which is shredding up the cabbage to put on top, you can even buy bags of cabbage for that too. So I hope you'll remember that this makes this dish totally within reach, even if you're super busy. The other thing I wanted to point out about this dish is that it's yet again another skillet. And if you were with me, my first class for natural grocers was back in May of 2021, where we did a whole class on how to make a skillet. What is the structure of a skillet? And we made an Asian skillet in that class. But as you'll see, even though we're making tacos, the fact is it starts as yet another skillet. And the way skillets work, and you'll see this is exactly how this one is, we always start with the flavor foundation, that's our aromatics, onion, garlic, peppers, things like that. Then we go ahead and we add a protein, in this case, the beans or the hamburger. Then we add the vegetables, the spinach and the sweet potatoes. And then we serve it either on or in a whole grain, like in this case, we're going to be putting it into tacos. And then we add accessories. So you can see it's yet another skillet, but we came up with a totally different thing than an Asian skillet and the Caribbean green skillet. So I hope you'll remember that, and look back on those classes if you'd like to learn more about this really easy cooking technique that can have you making dozens of dishes using pretty much the same recipe over and over, just swapping out the ingredients. Okay, so now while you're in your kitchen, you're having a little lull in the action here while this simmers, this is when you want to go ahead and start putting together the toppings. And now the toppings get us to, I think we're on number 4. Yeah, recipe rescue or recipe reform tip number 4, which is to use your accessories to add further nutrition to the meal. Now, I know that a lot of times the only topping we put on tacos is cheese, and sometimes a lot of cheese. So, but you can think about this as actually a really good opportunity to put a lot more nutrition in your dish. Like what I'm doing now is just slicing up this cabbage. What I do is I slice off a chunk of the head of cabbage, and then I just kind of shave off some thin pieces, thin slices of this cabbage. The thing is, you don't want to have big slices because that can get a little gangly in your mouth. Those are too big. But these are nice and thin, and they'll go really nicely on top of the tacos. The other thing that we've got going, let me pull my recipe out here and see the other things that we've got. Salsa, of course. The reason I'm doing salsa, it's winter here when we're doing this class. And I just don't even bother with tomatoes in the winter. I mean, it's just kind of almost a waste of money. I always see chopped tomatoes on taco pictures, but in the northern areas, tomatoes are awful in the winter, not worth it. So just get a really good flavorful salsa and that'll be much better. But of course, read the ingredients to make sure that it's a good one. The other thing we've got is fresh lime. And now I love a squeeze of lime. I don't often see that in the recipe, but give that a try too. Let me go ahead and open that up. Get it to squeeze on. And then chopped cilantro. And I think you all know about chopped cilantro. That's nothing new there. But my only little trick on that is to wash it in advance, maybe even the morning before. You're going to make this in that evening because it's a lot easier to chop if it's dry and not wet and sopping. And you can see that I don't bother worrying about the stems too much. If a few get in there, I don't worry about it. But again, just on the food waste issue, don't throw those stems away. They're also really good. Chop them up and they can go in your eggs or soup or something like that as well. So then the other thing we've got is then, of course, our avocado. Yep, here we go. And of course, we all love avocado on our dishes. And it's a good, healthful thing. But one thing to just bear in mind is that, you know, in the countries where they growing these avocados, particularly Mexico, the avocados are known as green gold. And so cartels have begun to move in and take over farmlands and cut down protected forests to be able to grow more avocados. And so it's something to just be mindful of about how many of those we're eating, okay? And then let's see, of course, then our two standbys, which is the cheese and the sour cream. And what's interesting about this is that I have to be dairy free, and I know a lot of people are, and if you're plant-based, you are. And it can be hard to go without cheese. And you go, oh, I can't stand tacos without that cheese melted all over. What's interesting is that the more you learn how to make these flavorful dishes with all these different ingredients, all these different topics and flavors in them, you will find that you might not miss that cheese so very much. And even if you do want cheese, maybe think about keeping it a little more in balance. So it's not a lot of cheese with a little bit of taco. We might want to keep it to where it's a little more in balance there. And I'll let you think about that. And maybe as between cheese and sour cream, you use just one of them instead of both. So, okay, so now we're ready to wrap this up, and it's time to think about the tacos themselves. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the tacos that I'm using today, but first I want to just go ahead and show you my little trick for warming them. And what I do is I take no more than about 4 to 6 of them. I'm only going to do 3 right now just for our class. But I go ahead and I wrap those in a napkin that I dampened. I just patted water over it. Don't stick it clear under the water, it'll get too wet. Just patted water over it. Then I wrap the tortillas in there. I stick them in the microwave for just 30 to 60 seconds. It works pretty well to warm them up pretty quickly. And of course, there's lots of different ways you can do that. Put them in the oven, fry them in a little bit of oil on the stove. If that's how you do it, that's just fine. But this is a great trick if you're in a hurry. So I'll go ahead and stick those in there. And then let me talk to you just a minute about, I'm going to do just 30 seconds because I only had 3 of them in there. I want to talk to you just a little bit about, this gets us into recipe reform trick number 5, which is to substitute whole grains for half grains. And what I mean by half grains are things that are made, generally those things that are made with white flour. Because really, white flour does not have much to recommend it. And a lot of times what we do when we're making Mexican food is that we use white flour tortillas for burritos, enchiladas, that kind of thing. And what you have to remember is that I think this is about done. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and turn it off here completely. What you have to remember about white flour is that, number one, it's a refined grain, which means that the very nutrient dense minerals and vitamins that go in the bran and germ have all been taken off. So we're left with just kind of a white paste. And then making it worse, then I looked up the ingredients in a typical, let me see if I can find my page here. I want to read you some of the ingredients that are in there. Okay. And then making matters worse, the typical white flour tortilla contains also vegetable shortening, glycerin, mono and diglycerides, potassium sorbate, and calcium propionate, fumaric acid, hydrogenated vegetable oil, and dough conditioner. And those are all more of those, I call those not foods, and we don't want to be eating those. So that's why in today's recipe, we're using corn tortillas, because as a general rule, they should only have corn, salt, and water in them, maybe a little bit of oil, especially if they're hard shelled. But that's not to say that manufacturers can't turn them into a lot of not foods, include a lot of not foods in them, and they do. And that's why you have to read the ingredient listing, because they've got stuff in those as well. But I'm using these Ezekiel sprouted corn tortillas because I know that they're whole grain corn. And I also, all that they have in them is filtered water, sea salt, and the lime that they use to process the corn. So that's why we're using those today. So let's go ahead and plate this dish, and let me grab a little plate here and see what this is going to look like here, I think what you're going to find, oh, these are just nicely warmed up, and the moist napkin adds makes them so they're real flexible. And so what I'm doing here, I'm going to go ahead, of course, and put some of this filling on top, and I'm doing what I call an open face tortilla. And the reason is that if you have to roll it up, you can't put as much filling in. And remember, we want to get to the point where we have 50% of our plate as vegetables. And so you'd have a logistical problem doing that with just getting a tiny bit in each rolled tortilla. So that's why we have open face. Just eat it with a fork and knife. Here I'm going to add more nutrition with this cabbage. I'm going to add more nutrition with the cilantro. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of good vitamin C lime juice on top. And of course, our salsa that gets some beautiful color in. And then, of course, if you want a little bit of cheese as well, I'll put a little bit on there because we want to just show you what a beautiful presentation that makes. Okay, and then let's see if we can get a close-up of that. There we go. And that's our spinach and sweet potato soft shell tortilla. So enjoy that. And then I'm going to wrap things up with Janine now and share a little quick post-meal practice that you might want to get into. Thanks for joining me here in the kitchen.
So Janine, can you believe what a gorgeous, colorful dish that is?
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I know. And what I want to do is close out though with a good post-meal making practice, because I know that after you make a meal, you're hungry, you're dying to eat it. But can I encourage you to just take a couple seconds to stop, evaluate, and congratulate? And what I mean by that is look at that dish that you made and look and see that it's made from all real whole foods, which is great to begin with. But you've also gotten all the elements of a good meal, which is whole grains, lean, clean proteins, good fats, and of course, lots of vegetables. And then you look at that color, and that can tell you that you're getting a wide diversity of nutrients. So that's the point when you just take a second to congratulate yourself. You've done a great job making a healthy meal. And you know, a lot of people think healthy eating is so difficult, but you can see that this isn't difficult at all, especially if you'll use those convenience options that I talked about. If you're pressed for time, use those and you can still get healthy meals on the table in a hurry. So I want to say thank you all for joining us, and remember the 5 tricks that we went over in this class. Use them for your other recipe favorites and turn your comfort foods into really nourishing and nurturing meals. So thank you again, and I hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Are you looking for personalized nutrition advice to support your unique health goals? Please visit naturalgrocers.com/virtual-coaching to book a free one-on-one nutritional health coaching session with your nutritional health coach today.